iconic rocker is best known for his wild and often unpredictable on-stage antics. When we last spoke nearly 3 years ago, Iggy said he might be done making music.
Iggy Pop isn't just the godfather of punk. He's the living, snarling spirit of rock rebellion itself. With the Stooges, he ripped up rock's rulebook and showed the world what raw, untamed music really sounds like. But behind that wild energy is a sharp tongue and zero patience for anything fake. If you're a band he thinks betrayed rock's true spirit, you've probably felt his wrath. Today, we're counting down the 6 bands that landed on the wrong side of Iggy Pop's fury. Number 1. Pink Floyd.
Played for fun and we played R&B, the Rolling Stones numbers, Bo Diddley, and it's like all...
For Iggy Pop, rock and roll was a punch in the gut, not a boring lecture in a planetarium. So when the 1970s gave rise to the slow, complicated, and brainy sounds of progressive rock, Iggy found a new enemy. And the biggest, most successful symbol of this musical style he despised was Pink Floyd. While the world was getting lost in the deep thoughts and spacey sounds of albums like The Dark Side of the Moon, Iggy Pop was on a mission to destroy everything that kind of music stood for.
But we are very into sort of timeless, ageless, spacious sort of...
He saw it as the absolute opposite of the short, sharp, and stupid rock and roll that he believed in. His hatred for them was a hatred for an entire way of thinking about music. The great scandal, in Iggy's eyes, was that Pink Floyd and other prog rock bands had taken the simple, energetic joy of rock music and turned it into homework.
Instruments, but they need to be with someone else. You can't do it all on your own. You can't be a complete...
He couldn't stand their long, drawn-out songs that went on for 10 or 20 minutes with complicated time signatures and quiet, moody sections. To him, a song should be 3 minutes of pure, dumb power. He hated the idea of concept albums, where a band would try to tell a big, important story about society or madness. Iggy's music with the Stooges was about simple, primal things, being bored and wanting to break stuff.
Well, I don't guess it has to be, but I mean, that's the way we like it. And we didn't grow up with a string quartet, and I guess that could be one of the reasons.
He saw Pink Floyd's deep lyrics and complex musical arrangements as incredibly pompous and pretentious. He believed they were making music for university students who wanted to feel smart, not for kids who wanted to feel alive. The difference between the two bands was like night and day, and it fueled Iggy's contempt.
You play gigs around ballrooms and dance halls and this sort of scene, because that's how it works at the moment.
A Pink Floyd concert was a carefully planned theatrical event. The band members often stood still, hidden by smoke machines and an incredible laser light show, while giant inflatable pigs floated over the audience. It was a passive experience where the crowd would sit and watch, amazed by the spectacle. And Iggy and the Stooges' show was the complete opposite. It was a chaotic, unpredictable, and often violent confrontation.
Someone to go and borrow some of these devices for me to try out.
Iggy would be screaming, covered in sweat and sometimes blood, throwing himself into the audience and smearing himself with peanut butter. He wanted to break the wall between the performer and the fan. Pink Floyd built that wall higher than anyone, hiding behind their technology and their serious art. For Iggy, this wasn't just a different style, it was a betrayal of what rock was meant to be. He hated their music because he felt it had no guts, no intimacy, and no fun. But his hatred for these brainy rock experiments was matched by his contempt for the lazy, sleepy bands who wanted nothing more than peace and love. Number 2. The Grateful Dead.
60...
somewhere between 64 and 67.
Now that seems...
For Iggy Pop, the biggest enemy wasn't just a sound. It was an entire idea, the hippie dream. And the undisputed kings of that lazy, tie-dyed dream were the Grateful Dead. In the late 1960s, America was split between two very different youth cultures. On one side were the hippies, with their message of peace and love, their long, gentle folk music, and their passive, stoned-out vibe. On the other side was the raw, angry, and violent energy that would eventually become punk rock, and Iggy and the Stooges were its ground zero. Iggy looked at the hippie movement and felt nothing but pure, unfiltered hatred. He saw it as a weak, boring, and dishonest escape from reality, and the Grateful Dead was its ultimate symbol. The scandal here was a full-blown culture war. Iggy despised everything the Grateful Dead stood for.
A simple life, a good life, you know, and like think about moving the whole human race ahead a step or a few steps.
He hated their music, which he saw as endless, pointless noodling. He couldn't stand the long, meandering guitar solos and the loose, sloppy rhythm that put their fans into a trance-like state. To Iggy, rock and roll was supposed to be a short, sharp shock to the system. It should be tight, aggressive, and over before you knew what hit you. The Stooges played music to start a riot. The Grateful Dead played music to sell t-shirts and veggie burritos.
And they don't have a lot of problems that the larger society has.
Iggy famously said that his band's job was to puke up the 60s, and the Grateful Dead represented all the peace and love garbage he wanted to destroy. He hated their fans, the Deadheads, whom he saw as a lazy, mindless herd of followers who had given up on changing the world and decided to just get high and sway back and forth.
You know, articulate it and give it back to them, then they'd turn around and give that back to us.
There are legendary stories of the Stooges being booked to play at festivals full of hippies, and the results were always a disaster. The Stooges would hit the stage with their wall of ugly, distorted noise, and Iggy would start screaming and throwing himself into the crowd, only to be met with blank, confused stares from an audience expecting gentle folk songs. These moments only fueled his hatred. He saw the hippies not as peaceful, but as complacent. They were ignoring the violence and chaos of the real world, and their music was the soundtrack to that ignorance. For Iggy, who came from the harsh reality of industrial Michigan, the hippie dream promoted by bands like the Grateful Dead wasn't just stupid, it was a dangerous lie. His music was a slap in the face to wake people up, while he believed their music was a substance to put them to sleep. While the hippies were too passive to fight back, Iggy also aimed his fire at the rock gods of the era, whose heavy sound he saw as nothing but empty thunder. Iggy's mission was to destroy boring rock and roll. If you believe in that raw, primal energy, hit subscribe for more stories about the legends who refused to compromise. Number 3. Led Zeppelin.
Sat down with them. There was all this kind of incense and stuff sort of floating around.
As the Stooges were smearing peanut butter on themselves in near-empty halls for a few dozen confused fans, another kind of band was conquering the world, the stadium rock gods. And the biggest, most powerful god of them all was Led Zeppelin. With their private jets, their massive crowds, and their larger-than-life sound, Led Zeppelin represented everything that Iggy Pop and the Stooges were rebelling against. If the Grateful Dead were the enemy on the peace and love front, Led Zeppelin was the enemy on the rock and roll front.
You could do this a little more often, maybe, or on the other hand, it might take the edge off things. I mean, this is probably a one-off.
Iggy looked at them not with professional jealousy, but with pure contempt. He saw them as a bloated, corporate, and soulless rock machine. The core of Iggy's hatred for Led Zeppelin was his belief that they were fundamentally unoriginal and boring. He heard their music and didn't hear something new or exciting. Instead, he heard a slick, polished, and overproduced version of old American blues music. He felt they had taken the raw, emotional music of poor black artists from the American South and turned it into a loud, dumbed-down product to be sold to rich white kids in giant arenas. This, for Iggy, was a major scandal. He believed in raw, primitive energy, and he saw Led Zeppelin as being the complete opposite. Their music was too clean, their guitar solos were too long and technical, and their rhythm section was too perfect. It lacked the dirt, the danger, and the feeling of falling apart that made the Stooges' music so thrilling. Iggy also couldn't stand their image and their lyrics. He mocked them for writing songs about castles and fairies and other fantasy nonsense. The Stooges wrote songs about being bored, frustrated, and wanting to feel alive in a dead world. Their music was about the street, about right now. Led Zeppelin's music was about some imaginary, mythical past. Iggy saw this as another form of escape, just like the hippies.
I was pleased with it, yeah. I thought we might be a little shaky because we always...
He also hated the way they presented themselves as untouchable rock gods, hiding behind a wall of managers and security. Iggy's entire act was about breaking down that wall. He would dive into the crowd, bleed on the stage, and confront his audience face to face. He wanted a connection, even a violent one. Led Zeppelin, on the other hand, played from a stage that was miles away from their fans. They were a remote, powerful force, and Iggy, the ultimate underdog, hated them for it. He saw them not as a real rock band, but as a very successful business. Hating the rock aristocracy was easy, but Iggy reserved a special kind of poison for the bands that came later, the ones who claimed to be just like him. Number 4. The Clash.
We smashed the microphones, we smashed the tape recorder, and we wrapped the tape around your head.
The punk rock explosion of 1977 should have been a moment of victory for its godfather, Iggy Pop. After years of being ignored, a whole new generation of bands was finally playing loud, fast, and aggressive music. Instead, this moment brought him a new set of enemies, and none were more infuriating to him than the British band The Clash. While the world was calling The Clash the only band that matters, Iggy saw them as little more than a gang of fakes who had stolen his act. His hatred for them was intense, personal, and led to one of the most infamous scandals in the studio. He believed they were traitors to the punk rock cause. Iggy's main problem with The Clash was that he felt they were complete phonies. He believed they had simply copied the sound, energy, and style of the Stooges and other early American punk bands, watered it down, and then sold it back to the world with a bunch of simplistic political slogans. He didn't believe their political act for 1 second. He saw their songs about revolution and fighting the system as a shallow gimmick, a cool fashion statement rather than a real belief. The most scandalous chapter of their feud happened in 1979 when The Clash's singer, Joe Strummer, and guitarist, Mick Jones, were invited to help produce Iggy's album Soldier. It was a complete disaster. The sessions were filled with arguments and tension. Iggy felt that Strummer and Jones were arrogant and trying to make him sound like them. The story goes that the arguments in the studio got so bad that they almost came to physical blows.
I think every club in New York jams in as many people as possible, anywhere in the world.
Iggy hated the way they were trying to control his music. He wanted a raw, simple sound, and he felt The Clash were trying to make it too polished and complicated. In the end, Iggy got so fed up with them that he kicked them out of the project. He later said he had to secretly sneak back into the studio at night to remix the album and undo the damage they had done. He has insulted them in the press for decades. He called Joe Strummer pompous and made fun of their tough guy image, suggesting they weren't as tough as they pretended to be.
He said he'd changed from conservative because he'd fought in the war. Yeah. For, the kids to have jobs and everything, yeah.
For Iggy, The Clash had committed the ultimate crime. They had taken the dangerous, real, and personal art form he had helped create and turned it into a calculated, commercial product with a fake political message. He didn't just dislike them. He saw them as imposters who had stolen the punk rock crown. But his anger at London's punks was a world away from the complicated rivalries brewing with the heroes of his own American punk scene. From rock gods to punk phonies, Iggy called them all out. If you love these unfiltered stories about rock's most authentic rebels, make sure you're subscribed for what's next. Number 5. The Ramones. When the punk rock scene exploded in New York City in the mid-1970s, it created a new batch of heroes overnight. But for Iggy Pop, the man often called the godfather of punk, it just created a new set of enemies. No one defined the New York punk look and sound more than the Ramones. With their matching leather jackets, ripped jeans, and super fast, 2-minute rock songs, they became legends. Iggy, however, had been making raw, in-your-face music for years with his band The Stooges, and he had a very dim view of these newcomers. He didn't see them as partners in crime. He saw them as a cheap copy of the real, dangerous thing he had created nearly a decade before. The secret drama here was a quiet war over respect and who really started punk. Iggy found the Ramones' strict formula to be a creative prison. He famously called their music B-movie rock, meaning it was schlocky and fun, but not serious art. He complained that once you heard a few of their songs, you'd heard them all.
I guess he's a perfectionist, so he likes to spend a lot of time redoing things and re-listening and...
That started every song. The simple chords that never changed, and the sugary pop melodies hidden under the loud guitars. Musically, this was the opposite of what he did. Johnny Ramone's guitar playing was like a machine gun, a constant, disciplined buzzsaw of downstroked notes. Iggy's guitarist in the Stooges, Ron Ashton, was the opposite. His solos were wild, messy, and sounded like they were falling apart. It was the sound of chaos, not control.
We were kind of disgusted with the music we were hearing also in America on the radio.
The lyrics were another point of conflict. The Ramones sang about fun, cartoonish things like sniffing glue or beating someone with a baseball bat. It was teenage rebellion for laughs. Iggy's lyrics came from a much darker place. He sang about feeling less than human. I want to be your dog. A crushing sense of boredom and meaninglessness, no fun, and the world falling apart. Search and destroy.
I mean, they took that way to do that, and play, disco music and things like that to make it. We do what we believe in, we have our integrity.
For him, this wasn't a joke, it was his reality. This bitterness went beyond the music. Iggy hated their look. He saw their matching outfits and bowl haircuts as a gimmick, a brand. The Ramones created a punk rock uniform. But for Iggy, the whole point of punk was to have no uniform. It was about being a complete individual and breaking every rule, not creating a new one that all the kids could copy. His own stage act was proof of this. He didn't have a costume. He was often shirtless, covered in sweat, and sometimes bleeding from rolling in broken glass. His look wasn't a choice. It was the messy result of the chaos he unleashed. For Iggy, this was deeply personal. His journey had been brutal. By 1976, when the Ramones' first album came out and made them famous, Iggy was at rock bottom. He had survived a crippling heroin addiction, years of being ignored by the music industry, and had even checked himself into a mental hospital in California to get clean. Imagine his view. He was locked away, his career in ashes, while back in New York, a band was getting famous for a cleaner, safer version of the very music that had nearly destroyed him. To add insult to injury, there was a man connecting them, their manager, Danny Fields. Fields had briefly managed the Stooges and saw their brilliant, chaotic flame burn out completely. He learned from that failure. He wrestled with his feelings about the first wave of punk, but he was even more confused by the generation that made punk a multi-million-dollar business. Number 6. Green Day.
That we've come to appreciate.
Yeah, we just did a couple lines of tempo and it's all good.
What happens when a musical revolution gets turned into a safe, radio-friendly product? For the godfather of punk, it creates a very complicated and often hateful feeling. When punk rock had a massive commercial revival in the 1990s, led by bands like Green Day, Iggy Pop had to watch as the dangerous, underground music he helped create became mainstream family entertainment. While he has sometimes been diplomatic and given these bands credit for keeping the sound alive, his deeper interviews reveal a clear disdain for what punk became, with Green Day being the most obvious symbol of this sanitized new version. Iggy's hatred was not for the band members personally, but for what they represented, the taming of punk rock. The central scandal for him was the loss of genuine danger. When the Stooges were playing in the late 60s and early 70s, their shows were unpredictable and often violent. The music was a real threat to the established order. It was ugly, confrontational, and deeply unpopular. It was the sound of failure and desperation. By contrast, the punk rock of Green Day in the 1990s was a massive commercial success. It was all over MTV and the radio. It was fun, catchy, and something your little brother could listen to. Iggy often called this new wave of punk happy punk.
People very much. I think people are just sort of stupid. I think that anger is a whole lot more interesting than happiness.
He saw it as a cleaned up, simplified version of the real thing, stripped of all its original darkness and menace. He would often talk about the huge difference between the world he came from and the world that made Green Day famous. His punk was a reaction to the Vietnam War, social chaos, and a feeling of complete hopelessness. Their punk, he felt, was a reaction to being bored in the suburbs. He saw their music as lacking the deep, existential pain that had fueled his own work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. We sit around and we play, we'll bring up like different songs and...
He was the real deal who had lived through the struggle, and he saw them as kids who had adopted the style without understanding the substance. It was the ultimate creator's disappointment, watching your wild, untamable child grow up to be a polite, successful, and somewhat boring adult. While he might respect their success, he hated that the word punk, a word that for him meant real danger and artistic risk, was now associated with bands that were, in his eyes, just another safe and profitable part of the music industry. Iggy's rage was a weapon against anything fake or boring in music. Was he a bitter genius or rock's true conscience? Tell us what you think. Like and subscribe for more.